The notes are out there for anybody who wants them, both in paper form. If everybody online, you know how you can get them. Please excuse me today. My voice is kind of hoarse. I've been dealing with the cooties all week long. I'm feeling better, but still have that lingering crazy voice. It's been a tough week. I can't suck on a cough drop and talk at the same time. It's been a tough week. Actually, today's actually the first day I got out of bed. Been a crazy, crazy week. But I got caught up on a whole bunch of shows I haven't watched in a long time. I know there's a lot of people that are sick out there. I know our brother Max and his family, they've been dealing with it for a couple of weeks now. Just seems to go and go. My son David was sick. Everybody got sick. 'Tis the season, I guess, right? This morning, our opening verse is from the Gospel according to John, chapter 10 and verses 1 through 5 and verse 27, some very, very familiar ground. And of course, I'm reading out of the Scriptures version, and it says the following. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter through the door into the sheepfold, but climbs up by another way, that one is a thief and a robber. But he who enters through the door is the shepherd of the sheep. The doorkeeper opens for him, and the sheep hear his voice. And he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And when he has brought out his own sheep, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, because they know his voice. And they shall by no means follow a stranger, but shall flee from him, because they do not know the voice of strangers. Verse 27, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. For a few moments this morning, the topic and the title of the message is, my sheep hear my voice. My sheep hear my voice. You guys know the prayer? If you do, pray it with me. Abba, give us eyes to see, ears to hear, and hearts that are willing to obey. In the Master's name, amen. Amen. It's funny, I'm talking about voice today, and I don't have one. Ironic, I suppose. This is connected to all the stuff that we've been talking about for weeks. This is really such a huge topic. We started this whole thing off with the question or the idea coming out of Galatians is, why then the law? What is the law for? Are we under the law? Are we not under the law? And we've like I said, I don't know, it's maybe 4th, 5th, 6th week that we've been talking about this. So we've been all over the place. We've been in all sorts of different directions, looking at it from different perspectives. And today is no different. We're going to take it from a little bit different perspective, but it really does touch on the same idea, expounds on that same idea. Just by way of a little review, thus far, some of the big concepts that we've sort of talked about, gone over, that I want you to keep in the forefront of your mind as we talk this morning, is that the voice at Mount Sinai is the voice of the angel of Yah, otherwise known to us as the Messiah. Now, I know we've talked about this many times in the years prior, always thinking it was the voice of Father, but it is the voice of Messiah. The voice of the burning bush is the voice of the angel of Yah, not like any other angel we see in the Scripture. All other angels, when we see them in the Scripture and people meet angels, whether it's Gabriel, Michael, Peniel, whoever, whatever angel it is, normally we see the reaction is men either fall down as dead or they fall down and they begin to worship the angel. And when they do that, what does the angel do? tells him, get up, get up. Don't do that. I'm one of your brethren. We worship Yah, except not this angel, not the angel that speaks from the burning bush. An angel just means messenger. This messenger proclaims himself to be the Yod-He-Wav-He, Yahuwah, the voice of the burning bush, the King of Israel, the God of Israel. The same voice is the voice that speaks from Mount Sinai. And again, this is review. You guys can go back and look at some of the other messages to get more detailed information about this. But we see this given to us both in the book of Acts, chapter 6, in the story of Stephen, when he tells us that it was the voice of the messenger that speaks to Moses in the bush and speaks to Moses and the children of Israel from Mount Sinai. And also here in Hebrews chapter 12, it says, and to Yeshua Messiah, or Yahushua the mediator of a new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling, which he speaks better than the blood of Abel. Take heed not to refuse the one speaking. The one speaking that he's talking about is Yeshua Messiah, or Yahushua Messiah, the mediator of a new covenant. Take heed not to refuse the one speaking. For if those did not escape who refused the warning on earth, the warning he's referring to is Mount Sinai. For if those did not escape who refused the warning on earth, much less we who turn away from him from heaven, the Messiah, whose voice shook the earth then at Mount Sinai, but now he has promised, saying, yet once more I shake not only the earth, but also the heaven. And if you read chapter 12, read all of chapter 12, you'll really get the context. The whole chapter, half the chapter is about Mount Sinai. From 18 on, he's given us the comparison of Mount Sinai. And here he equates that the voice of Mount Sinai is the same voice we are listening to now, except it doesn't come down to us from a mountain. It comes down to us from heaven, from Jerusalem. And of course, he's speaking of the Messiah. So the voice of the law, the giver of the law, yes, is Moses, but the actual giver of the law to Moses is the messenger of Yah, who we would know today as the Mashiach. In Exodus chapter 20, number 4 on your notes. Just review a couple of quick things. The same voice who proclaims these things. Now, Exodus chapter 20 are the commandments. The first time that the commandments are spoken from Mount Sinai. Well, who speaks the commandments from Mount Sinai? The angel of Yah speaks the commandments of Mount Sinai. And as he goes through the commandments in chapter 20 and verse 6, it says, you do not bow down to them nor serve them. He's talking about not worshiping any idols. For I, Yah, your Elohim, remember this is the angel of Yah, for I, Yah, your Elohim, am a jealous El, visiting the crookedness of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving commitment to thousands to those who love me and guard or keep my commandments. Very, very important verse, especially the latter part of that verse, because these are the exact words that the Master says when he comes as the incarnation we know him to be today. John chapter 14, verse 15, he says, if you love me, you will guard my commandments. The same words from Exodus chapter 20, verse 6. And don't forget, he's speaking to Jewish people who know their Torah. They know these words. So when he's saying these words, they're supposed to make the connection that, oh my goodness, the only person who says these words are the voice from Mount Sinai. John chapter 14 and verse 21. He who possesses my commandments and guards them, it is he who loves me. Same thing. Said a little bit differently, but it's the same thing. And he who loves me shall be loved by my Father, and I shall love him and manifest myself to him. So we're not denying Father in any way. Listen to last week's message. It says, answering him, if anyone loves me, he shall guard my word. Again, a little bit different verbiage, but it says the same thing. And my Father shall love him, and we shall come to him and make our stay with him. He who does not love me does not keep my words or keep my commandments. And the word which you hear is not mine, but of the Father who sent me. So while it might be the voice of the burning bush is the angel of Yah, who is the one thinking these words first? Who's the one that puts these words out there first as a thought? Father does. Who is the very voice of Father? Who is the word of Father? Messiah is. He speaks for Father. And he says this multiple times in the Gospels. In fact, he said it right here. I'm not telling you my words, I'm telling you Father's words. But whose voice are we hearing when we hear Father's words? We're hearing the Son's voice. Or in the case of Exodus, we are hearing the angel of Yah's voice, or the angel of the Lord, depending upon what version you use. So if all of that is true, and again, we spent weeks talking about this, this makes John chapter 5 make a lot more sense to me than it ever did before. The Master says, in speaking to the Pharisees and Sadducees, and the Father who sent me, he bore witness of me. You have neither heard his voice at any time nor seen his form. Now, I always thought, well, wait a minute, we heard his voice at Mount Sinai. That's when we heard Father's voice. But now I realize, wait a minute, no, we didn't. We heard Father's words, but who is the voice of Father? The Messiah is. So when Messiah says, you have not heard his voice, he means it, I think, literally. You've never heard Father speak. They've heard a voice. It just wasn't Father's. It was the Son whom now he sends. And you have neither seen his form. So then what form did we see? Because on Mount Sinai, they did see a form. The elders went up and ate with him. They fellowshiped with him. Ezekiel sees him riding on a Merkabah, a throne. The three young Hebrew boys see him in the fiery furnace. If we've never seen Father's image, who have we seen? The Son. We've seen the Son. It's always been about the Son. The whole story is about the Son. And if the Son is the one who speaks from Mount Sinai, the words of the Father, that makes the Son the giver of the Torah, or the giver of the law. And listen to last week's message. He's the judge. He's the Savior. He is the one who will destroy. We'll get to that in a couple of weeks, I hope. But all of that is just review, so that we're all sort of on the same page. Hopefully you've listened to the previous messages. This isn't new to you. All right, so back to our opening verse now, or opening set of verses. In John chapter 10, one more time, let's take a look at the opening verse one more time. So we're talking about the voice of Father, but the one speaking it is the Son. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the door into the sheepfold, but climbs up some other way, that one is a thief and a robber. Now, we've talked about this before. What he's referring to are the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the priests. The pen, or the sheep pen he's referring to, is the house of Israel in a general sense, but he's talking about the temple. He's talking about the ones who have entered not through the door, but climbed up some other way, like Caiaphas and Annas and the Herodians and the Pharisees, none of which Father ordained or Messiah ordained to be leaders. He ordained the priesthood, the sons of Aaron, and then eventually the sons of Zadok. He never anointed or gave Pharisees as leaders. He never anointed or gave Herodians as leaders. He never anointed or gave the Hasmoneans, the whole Maccabee story, as priests. Never did he. They climbed up some other way. And now they are in leadership. And what does he call them? Thieves and robbers. And not just here, he calls them that multiple times throughout the gospel. Walks in, knocks over the table changers, the money changers there at Passover. And what does he say that the priests of the temple have done to Father's house? They have made it a den of thieves. But he who enters through the door is the shepherd of the sheep. The doorkeeper opens for him, and the sheep hear his voice. Now, it was years and years ago that I remember doing a study on this, and something really interesting came up in a video that I was watching. Now, obviously, we're not herdsmen, we're not sheep keepers or cattle keepers. I hope you don't have any cattle in your backyard. You got a big backyard for that. So this isn't really part of our culture. But in the sheep herding culture, what winds up happening is the sheep become so attentive to whoever their shepherd is. Now, we all do know this if you have an animal, if you have a pet. This does also work with pets as well. Every shepherd has a particular call, a particular whistle, a particular yell that those that are his sheep know. So what they wind up doing eventually at some point, there's multiple shepherds, lots of different sheep flocks out there. At night, they put them all in a pen together. And in the morning, the guy who's guarding the gate opens it up. The shepherd comes in and he goes something like this. I don't make it too loud. That's my whistle. Now, I was practicing. I was thinking about this. I'm at my house just a couple hours ago. And I'm in my bedroom and I'm looking it over, thinking about it. And I go, you know what comes running into the room? My dog. Because that's what I do every time I call him. He came running. He's like, what? I'm like, I'm sorry. No, false alarm. I didn't call you. And I saw the video of it. It was so amazing. This guy would walk up and it wasn't a whistle. He did some other kind of call, clicking or something. And all sorts of sheep started to get out of the pen. Not all of them, only his sheep. Because his sheep knew his voice. So this is a real analogy that the master is giving to us, something they would have understood, even though they don't understand all of this. We'll find out in a second. So when he says, my sheep know my voice, they know whatever his whistle is. They are able to differentiate between his voice and some other shepherd who goes in there and does a whistle. Even if it sounds something like the initial whistle, they'll be able to tell the difference between the shepherd's whistle and some other one that came up a different way, climbed over the fence. And he calls, the doorkeeper opens to him, and the sheep hear his voice. And he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And when he has brought out his own sheep, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, because they know his voice. Even as they get out of the sheep pen, they follow the voice of that one shepherd. And verse 5 is really important. We'll look at it again in a second. And they shall by no means follow a stranger, but shall flee from him, because they do not know the voice of strangers. So the master is using this analogy for himself. And I think in the very next verse, it says that the people he was speaking to, they didn't understand what he was saying when he uses this analogy. But verse 27, he winds it up by saying, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. So we've got this example of the voice of the shepherd, and what we just finished talking about, who's the voice of Mount Sinai? The Son. Who is the voice of Father's word? The Son. Who is the word of El? The Son. So whose voice are we supposed to recognize? It may be Father's words, but whose voice are we supposed to recognize? The Son's voice, as he states here clearly. So with that, number 5 on your notes there. One more time, John chapter 10 and verse 5, last verse we just read. And they shall by no means follow a stranger, but shall flee from him. Very important. What are the sheep who know his voice supposed to do when they hear another voice? Flee from it. They do not know the voice of strangers. Yahushua, Messiah, used this figure of speech, but look at what it says. But they did not know what he had been saying to them. Didn't make sense to them, at least not at this particular moment. It would later. This isn't the first time in the biblical account that we get this story of shepherd and sheep wandering and sheep not knowing their master. So what he's telling us is there are other shepherds who climb up a different way who aren't supposed to be there, except they don't have the same voice as the shepherd. And those who are his real sheep shouldn't follow those shepherds, those hirelings. They should follow the actual true shepherd. This story is told to us way before the master says it in John chapter 10, in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 34. I'm starting at verse 1, and it says the following. And the word of Yah came to me, saying, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. So by shepherds, what do we actually mean when we say shepherd? Today we wouldn't say shepherd. What word would we use today in our English vernacular? Pastor. That's what a shepherd is. He's a pastor. You could say the word bishop. It means the same thing. A shepherd is a pastor. Who is he speaking to? The shepherds of Israel. So by shepherd, he doesn't just mean somebody who leads sheep out. He's talking about those who teach, those who give explanation, those who present Father's word. We now know if you present Father's word in a voice that is not the same voice as the Messiah, then you are a hireling and you've come up some other way. And the sheep should not listen to the voice. But if it is the master's voice, if we recognize it as such, his sheep hear his voice and they follow. But here is the problem. And the word of Yah came to me, saying, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds, the pastors of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, Thus says the master Yahuwah to the shepherds, Woe to the shepherds of Israel who have been feeding themselves. When the master says, woe to you, is that a good thing or a bad thing? That's a very bad thing. You don't want to hear woe. Woe is not a good thing. He says, woe to the shepherds of Israel. You have been feeding yourselves. So instead of teaching the sheep the right way, instead of doing what a pastor's supposed to do, they were actually doing for themselves. Whatever they were doing was a benefit to themselves. Should not the shepherds feed the flock? Well, ultimately, what's the job of a shepherd? To lead the sheep to a pasture that is green so that they can eat. Put that in an analogy that makes sense to us. It's to lead Father's people to a place in Father's word that they can understand it. But it has to be in the voice of the one they recognize. I'm not talking about my actual voice, as terrible as it sounds today. Not my actual voice, but his voice is what you should hear. Woe to the shepherds. Verse 7. I'm skipping some verses. I want you to go back. You guys can read the whole chapter yourselves. It's an amazing chapter. He says, Therefore you shepherds, hear the word of Yah. As I live, declares the master Yahuwah. Because my flock became a prey, and my flock became food for every beast of the field, from not having a shepherd, and my shepherds did not search for my flock, but the shepherds fed themselves and did not feed my flock. Therefore, O shepherds, hear the word of Yahuwah. Thus says the master Yah, see, I am against the shepherds. So just to paint the picture here, he's telling us, what did the shepherds of Israel not do? They didn't teach their people correctly. And because they didn't teach their people correctly, he didn't lead them to pastures where they could eat, where they would hear Father's word, the voice of the one from the burning bush, his people became prey. Since they didn't know the instruction on how to live and how to do things, how to love Yah with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and how to love your neighbor as yourself, they became prey for the wolves, the nations around them, and they began to do what the nations around them did. This is even though he's painting it as a shepherd and flock and animals, this is the story he's telling us. This is the story Ezekiel is telling us. Messiah is the answer to that story, but this is the story that Ezekiel is telling us. And who is responsible for all of this? The shepherds. The shepherds. And Father through the Son says, I am against the shepherds. Number 6 on your notes, same chapter. For thus says the master, Yahuwah, verse 11, same chapter. For thus says the master Yahuwah, see, I myself shall search for my sheep and seek them out. So think about this for a second. He's telling us, since my shepherds, who are those who claim to be shepherds, are not doing what a shepherd does, what is the master going to do? I'm going to come and be a shepherd for them. Think about that a second. What did he actually tell us is going to happen? He, Yahuwah, is going to come and be the shepherd and seek out his flock. See, I myself shall search for my sheep and seek them out, the ones you've scattered. As a shepherd seeks out his flock on the day when he is among the scattered sheep, so I shall seek out my sheep and deliver them from all the places where they were scattered in a day of cloud and thick darkness. And I shall bring them out from the peoples and gather them from the lands and shall bring them to their own land. He's talking about the whole scattering of the house of Israel. God, Yah's people, now this is prophecy he's speaking about. Yah's people are scattered where on this world? Everywhere, all over. And he's saying, I'm going to come and I'm going to be a shepherd and I'm going to call my sheep out from everywhere on this planet, amongst all the nations, to come back to the sheepfold. This is prophecy. Who's the only one that does this? Messiah does. How many times does Messiah analogize himself to a shepherd? We just sang the song, he leaves the 99, right? In fact, we sang 3 songs about the shepherd today. We sang the Good Shepherd song that even though I walk through the valley of the shadow, it's funny how these songs actually relate to what we're going to, me and Matt, we don't schedule this, it just sort of happens that way. He is the Good Shepherd. He says the shepherd leaves the 99 and gets the one who's lost. Well, that's what he's telling us he's going to do here in Ezekiel way before the master comes in the Gospel of John. I shall seek them out. Verse 13, and I shall bring them out from the peoples and gather them from the lands and shall bring them to their own land. The resurrection, the kingdom. And I shall feed them on the mountains of Israel, in the valleys and in the dwellings of the land. In good pasture I shall feed them, and their fold shall be on the high mountains of Israel. They shall lie there in a good fold and feed in rich pasture on the mountains of Israel. I shall feed my flock and make them lie down. Yah is my shepherd. He makes me lie down in green. Who is this person he's talking about to come? The Good Shepherd. Psalm 23. Who makes us lie down in green pastures. I shall feed my flock and make them lie down, declares the Master Yahuwah. I shall seek out the lost and bring back the strayed. I have come to save that which was lost. These are all indicative terms that as the Master says them, the people who were hearing them in the first century, in their minds should have gone back to these verses and realized who he is. Messiah is the fulfillment of this chapter. I shall seek out the lost and bring back the stray. I shall bind up the broken and strengthen that which was sick. Well, what did the Master do? I have come to set the captives free, to bind up the broken, set free the captives. That's exactly what he came to do. He came to do the work of the shepherd, because the shepherds who were there were not good shepherds. So he would come himself. The broken and strengthen that which was sick, but the fat and the strong I shall destroy. I shall feed them with right ruling. We spent enough time talking about right ruling to know right ruling means statutes and judgments. So what's the green pasture he's going to feed us with? from the analogy here? The Torah, the instructions, the statutes, the judgments. That's the green pasture. It's lots of things. It's the green pasture, it's the bread, it's all of these analogies. But in this case, he's talking about feeding the sheep, and the sheep eat grass, green grass. In this case, the green grass is right ruling, or statutes and judgments. Who gives the statutes and judgments from the mountain? The angel of Yah does. The voice that represents Father does. He is the good shepherd. Number 7 on your notes. Messiah meticulously lived all of this out. Here's the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6 and verse 34. Should be familiar. This happens twice in 2 different places for 2 different reasons. But here's the first one. And having gone out, Yahushua saw a large crowd and was moved with compassion for them, because they were like sheep having no shepherd. Immediately, where should our minds go to? Everything we just read in Ezekiel 34. Obviously, John chapter 10, where we started off with. So here's the master there on the mountains of Israel. All of these people are coming out from all the towns to follow him, a multitude of people. And how does he see them? As people who have no shepherd. So what's he going to do? What did he already tell us he was going to do in Ezekiel? I shall come and shepherd them myself. And he does. And he began to teach them many matters. Well, what matters did the Messiah teach? The statutes and the judgments. He instructed us in Father's word. That's what he did as a shepherd. The commandments. Skipping on to verse 37. This is the same story, but don't want to read all the verses. So they're there. He's talking with them. He's teaching them Torah. Same thing he does on the Mount. Blessed are the poor, blessed are the meek. All the stuff he does in Matthew 5, 6, 7. He does out there with them. Teaches them the Torah correctly. And then he turns to his disciples. He says, but he answering said to them, you give them food. You give them to eat. Now, who's supposed to feed them in a spiritual sense? The shepherds. So what is he telling his disciples now to do? Feed them. I fed them. Now, you feed them. Of course, it's going to be in a literal sense here, but he's making a point here. It's not only that the master comes to feed, but the master also gives us good shepherds who are also supposed to feed us, as opposed to the bad shepherds who did nothing but scatter us and feed themselves. So he says, you give them to eat. And they said to him, should we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them to eat? They don't get it yet. Then he said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. And when they had found, they said, 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he ordered them to make them all sit down in groups on the green grass. What does the shepherd do? He leads us to green pastures. So many different levels of truth are going on here just in the story. He's living Ezekiel 34. He's living John chapter 10. And this happens twice. The first time, what we are reading about right here, after he feeds everybody, of course, this is the multiplication of the fish and the multiplication of the bread. How many fish? 2 fish. Who are the 2 fish? Does anybody? I know we've talked about this before. Anybody remember what the symbol of the 2 fish are? The northern house and the southern house. The 2 fish, the split house of Israel, is represented in the 2 fish. What are 5 loaves of bread? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. He fed the house of Israel what? The Torah, the statutes, and the judgments. just in the analogy, that's what he's telling us. And once it's all over, what's left over? So he feeds 5,000, and there are 12 baskets full of bread left over. For who? Why 12 baskets of bread? Well, it was for the northern house and southern house, of which are how many tribes? 12. Even after the initial eating, there is still food for who? Or bread for who? The whole house of Israel. This is an analogy, but a tremendous prophetic teaching in and of itself. This is done in an area of Capernaum at the Sea of Galilee called Tagba. Then, days later, he feeds 4,000. This time, it's not in the same area of the Sea of Galilee. He does this in an area known as the Decapolis. It's a Gentile area near Tyre and Sidon. So there's people in the crowd or the multitude of the 4,000 that are not Israeli. They're not of Judah. They are what? Gentiles who have heard, like the Syrophoenician women. Where does she come from? Sidon. She heard all of the stories. They all did. They all heard of this prophet. So we've got a mixture of people that are there. He does a similar thing, teaches them Torah, feeds them, except this time afterward, they take up 7 baskets of bread, not 12. You say, well, why is there 12 the first time and only 7 the second time? So remember, this is in Decapolis, a Gentile region of northern, way above Galilee, northern Israel, almost to Syria. These are the other sheep he told us about. I have sheep of this fold, and I have other sheep as well. Both of them I must bring, and I must make of the 2 flocks 1 herd, 1 people. Except this time they gather 7 loaves, or 7 basketfuls after. So numbers are important. Why is one 12 and the other one 7? Here's Matthew chapter 16 and verse 9. So this is right after that happens. The master then sort of quizzes them. Do you guys understand what all of this was about? He goes on the boat, goes over the sea. They follow him over. Verse 9, it says in Matthew chapter 16, do you still not understand? He asked them about the bread. They're thinking he meant the bread, for all the bread that he just made. They didn't bring any. He says, do you still not understand? Neither remember the 5 loaves and the 5,000 and how many baskets you picked up? Out of 5 loaves and 5,000, how many baskets did he pick up? 12. Enough for the whole house of Israel. Or the 7 loaves of the 4,000. So how many loaves did they start off with the 7, with the 4,000? 7 loaves, and they wound up with 7 baskets full. And Messiah is pointing out these numbers not accidentally. He's saying, don't you guys get it? Don't you realize what just happened? Can't you see what I just did as the shepherd who fed them the statutes and judgments for days and then did this one? Don't you get what happened? Of course, no, they didn't get it. But don't be surprised, we wouldn't get it either. Or the 7 loaves of the 4,000, how many large baskets you picked up? How is it that you do not understand that I speak to you concerning bread? That I do not understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread, but to beware of the leaven of the PDP version, of the hirelings, of the ones who climbed up another way, of the strangers' voices, who my sheep are not supposed to follow. But beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Then they understood that he did not say, be aware of the leaven of bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. In another place it says Pharisees, Sadducees, and the Herodians. So what's going on here? As a shepherd, There's 12 baskets that come to the 2 houses of Israel from the 5 loaves. To another, there's 7 with 7 baskets left over. Which one is leaven? Which one is the leaven of the Pharisees they are to be aware of, to be concerned of, to watch? Put it this way. Which one of those 2 miracles is his voice? Which one of those miracles is representative of another voice? Look with me, if you would, at number 8. So we already established who speaks from the mountain. Exodus chapter 20. Now I got a summary up there, and it's actually on your notes too. I think you guys should have on the back, you should have a page like this. It's got the color. And you don't have to look at this yet, but that's what you see up there. We're going to get to that in a second. So here's the voice speaking from the mountain that we've already established multiple times from multiple different angles. Who is the giver of the Torah? We've already got that, right? We've settled that down. So Exodus chapter 20, here is the instruction. And I've sort of abbreviated it because it's long to put there. Here's the voice from the mountain. I am Yahuwah, your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim, or Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other ones against my face. You do not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of that which is in the heavens above, or which is on the earth beneath, or which is in the waters under the earth. You do not bow down to them nor serve them. For I, Yahuwah your Elohim, am a jealous El. You do not bring the name of Yah your Elohim to nothing, to naught, make it void, minimize it, get rid of it. Remember the Sabbath day to set it apart. And I didn't put the rest of it in there, but he tells us what the Sabbath day is. 6 days you work, and on the 7th you rest. Verse 12, respect your father and your mother. Honor your father and mother. Verse 13, you do not murder. You do not commit adultery. You do not steal. You do not bear false witness against your neighbor. You do not covet. Verse 18, and all the people saw the thunders and the lightning flashes and the voice of the shofar and the mountain shaking, which is what we just read in Ezekiel chapter 12, that they heard the mountain trembling and the voice that came down. And if we didn't listen to that voice then, and we don't listen to his voice now, we're in trouble. It's the same voice. It's the same one speaking. And all the people saw the thunders, lightning flashes, and the voice of the shofar, and the mountain smoking. And the people saw it, and they trembled and stood at a distance, and said to Moshe, you speak with us, and we hear. But let not Elohim speak with us, lest we die. So whose voice did they hear from the mountain? Elohim, the angel of Yah, is whose voice they heard. And so they heard a voice. And what were the words the voice said? All of these instructions. That's the commandments. And verse 6, now this happens before this, but I'm using verse 6 at the end. He says, but showing loving commitment to thousands, to those who love me and guard my commandments. The same thing Messiah says, because it's the same voice. So what is the voice that we are supposed to recognize? Those words. Those words. That's the voice. Let me ask you something. If somebody came up to you and said, hey, I know Pastor Dave. And you're like, I don't know if you really know him. He's never really talked about you before. Oh, yeah, I know him. You know what he says all the time? For those that have hands that are ready to work and feet that are swift to walk and a heart that's willing to obey. Right? Isn't that Pastor Dave? Is that my voice? You would immediately say, it's close. You got 1 out of 3. Or if they said, oh, yeah, I know Pastor Dave. He says, give me a heart to obey and eyes to see and feet that are swift to run. You'd be like, well, you're batting 75%, 750, but is that my voice? No. But if someone came up, you say, yeah, I know Pastor Dave. He always says, give me eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart that's willing to obey. What would you say? That's PD. That's his voice. It may be somebody else speaking those words, but that's my voice. It's not even actually my voice, but you get the idea, right? My sheep know my voice. And the voice of a stranger who may be 50% right, 60% right, 75% right, is a hireling and has climbed up some other way and is the voice of a stranger, and my sheep run away from that. Now, all of a sudden, I hope this is starting to make sense to you. That's the voice of the Master. And I put it in here's just a quick summary of it. Do not worship any other gods. That's the first commandment. Do not make any idols. Second commandment. Do not misuse the name of Yah or really make void the name of Yah. Third commandment. Keep the Sabbath day holy, meaning the Sabbath is the seventh day out of the six. The first four commandments are how we love our Yah with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. The second set of tablets is to honor your father and mother. Do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not lie, do not cover. That is how we love others as ourselves, which are the two greatest commandments. The two greatest commandments aren't separate from this, they are this. They are the summary of this. Two separate tablets with two different concepts. Love Yah with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. This is the instruction. This is the voice from the burning bush. This is the voice from the mountain. This is the voice in Judah, on the Mount of Olives, on the Mount of Transfiguration, in the Gospel of John, in the Gospel of Matthew, all throughout all the Gospels. This is the same voice, not speaking his own words, but speaking the words Father gave him. I want you to look at something with me. This is number 9. It doesn't appear that way on your note, so bear with me and look up at the screen. He told us, beware the leaven of the Pharisees. Now, I didn't get into it, but we know the parable of the leaven, right? The 3 measures of meal. A woman puts a little leaven into 3 measures of meal, and what happens to the whole measure of meal? It all gets leavened, because a little leaven leavens the whole lump. Leaven, of course, is synonymous with sin or false doctrine. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, that he did as he shepherded them to the 4,000 with the 7 loaves and the 5,000 with the 12 loaves. Beware the leaven of the Pharisees. And the disciples didn't get it. They didn't understand it. Here is up in front of us what was there in Messiah's day. It is still here today. The rabbis, the Pharisees, because that's who they are today. They're just the progenitors of the Pharisees. Teach the Gentiles in Decapolis, the feeding of the 4,000, who started off with 7 loaves of bread and wind up with 7 baskets at the end. The commandments, if a Gentile wanted to come in, were not the commandments for the house of Israel. The Pharisees teach, you Gentiles can't really be like us, so there are different commandments for you. They're called the Noahide laws. And the Noahide laws are as follows. The 7 Noahide laws. And you can check it out on your back page if you want. They're on here. You want to follow me with me? The 7 Noahide laws, as traditionally enumerated, are the following. Not to worship idols. Well, hey, wait a minute. Does that sound like the voice of the burning bush? The voice of Mount Sinai? Yeah, I could hear that and say, okay, I'm with that. That's the voice of the burning bush. You are not to curse God. That's probably not a good thing to do, but is that exactly what was given to us by the burning bush? Yeah, I'm iffy with that one. You shall establish courts of justice. Now hold on a second. You were real good with number one, but so far you're losing me on everything else. You are not to commit murder. Okay, is that the voice of the master? Yeah, okay, I'd say that's the voice of the master. Do not commit adultery, bestiality, or sexual immorality. Yeah, that's the voice of the master, because there are commandments that support the 10 commandments that say these things. Do not steal. Yeah, okay, that's the voice of the mountain. Do not eat flesh torn from a living animal. What? What? How many of you have ran up to a cow and just taken a chunk right out of it? Or, a lamb just happens to be walking by. Says, oh, man, I want a lamb chop. Tore it right. How many of us really do that? What the heck is that commandment about? Let me ask you something. Is this the voice of the master? No. There's 7 loaves of bread that will wind up with 7 baskets full of leaven. Of leaven. The leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Herodians leaven the whole lump. And these are still given out today. Still, Brother Max and I were talking about the Hasidim that are trying to push this on the administration as part of the whole faith thing, to make this an international faith thing for all the Gentiles, that we should all come in under this thing. We spent time, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, how many Torahs are there for both the native born and the stranger and the foreigner? 1. How many judgments are there for the native born, the foreigner, and the stranger? 1. How many statutes are there for the native born, the foreigner, and the stranger? 1. This is not the voice of the master. This is the voice of a stranger. One whom we are supposed to what? Get away from. Leave. And not follow. It's number 10 on your notes, but it's really just a picture up here. This is that last part on the color version in the back, but I broke it up into 3 different things. Here's the commandments from our Jewish brethren as of today. And hopefully you can see it on the bottom there is the source if you want to look this up. And I don't know if it's actually kind of hard to see. I can give it to you after if you want. You can go look this up where this stuff comes from. This is from a Jewish source. So here's the 10 commandments from a Jewish source. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of slavery in Egypt. Well, that's true, but that's not actually the first commandment. He says, I am the Lord your God, or Yah your Elohim, who brought you out of Egypt. You shall have no other God before me. That's the commandment. Not just that I'm the God who brought you up out of Egypt. So what he's saying is, I'm the God of the Passover. You shall have no other Yah except for me. So right off the bat, I'm like, something's missing. Yeah, it's part of the voice of Yah, but it's not the whole story. The second commandment is, you shall have no other gods but me. The third, you shall not misuse the name of Yah, your Elohim. You shall remember and keep the Sabbath day holy. And again, they mean 6 days work, 7th day rest. So I'm okay with that. Honor your father and mother. Shall not murder, commit adultery, shall not steal, not bear false witness against your neighbor, shall not covet. So just from my humble opinion, we're like batting, 950 here. It's not 100, but it's 950. It's good. It's close. Here is the Catholic 10 Commandments. The first commandment is, and this is right out of the Vatican, I am the Lord your God, and you shall not have strange gods before me. Okay. Maybe. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Okay, well, that's there. Remember to keep holy the Lord's day. Uh-oh. Because by Lord's day, they don't mean 6 days work, 7th day rest, do they? What is the Lord's day to Catholicism? Sunday. Saying, well, we're representing or celebrating the day of the resurrection. Have you ever heard the Master's voice tell us to do so? No. Never has the voice from Mount Sinai, be it from Mount Sinai or here on earth, ever given commandment to tell us to do so. But what did the voice from Mount Sinai tell us while he was here? I am the Yah of the Sabbath, the master of the Sabbath. And he taught us how to keep it, what to do in it, what not to do in it. If your donkey's in a ditch, what do you do with your donkey? You help your neighbor get it out of the ditch, whether it's the Sabbath. Why would he give us instruction on that if we weren't to keep it? Did he not know? Did he forget? Did he not realize that everything was going to change afterward? If he didn't, then he's not who I think he is. But he did. We're not talking about the same Sabbath. What is this? Is this Yah's voice? No. No. This is not Yah's voice. Honor your father and mother. You shall not kill. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not covet your neighbor's goods. Hold on a second. Isn't that kind of the same thing? It's you shall not covet, period. Is this the Master's voice? Is this the voice from Mount Sinai? Is this the voice from the Mount of Olives? Is this the voice of the Mount of Transfiguration? Is this the voice that spoke the Beatitudes? No. No, it is not. Which means it is the voice of a stranger. And my sheep, when they hear the voice of a stranger, are supposed to what? Flee. Get away from it. Not follow it. Here are the commandments according to Protestantism. It's actually number 11. I did them out of order, but here's number 11. This excludes Lutheran because the Lutherans have the same commandments as the Catholics do. But other Protestants. You shall have no other gods before me. Okay, that sounds like his voice. You shall not make unto you any graven images. Okay, that's kind of his voice. Not very explanatory, but kind of his voice. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Okay, that's good. You shall remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Hold on a second. Because the original voice said, work 6 days, and on the 7th you rest. Is that what the Protestant commandments teach? Or do they teach what the Catholic commandments teach? Is that the voice of Yah? Is that the voice of the burning bush? Is that the voice that made the mountain tremble? No. It is the voice of a stranger. Honor your father and mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal false witness, and you shall not covet anything that belongs to your neighbor. Now, it's better than the 7 Noahide laws. It's better than the Lutheran or Catholic laws, but is it Yah's voice? No. And my people, my sheep, they know my voice, and they follow. And he leads us to green pastures. John 10 and verse 4, and when he had brought out his own sheep, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. And they shall by no means follow a stranger, but shall flee from him, because they do not know the voice of strangers. Oh my goodness, this is really incredible, isn't it? You realize that the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000 were teaching us this very lesson. Because a little leaven, even if it's just one commandment, a little leaven does what? Leavens the whole lump, the whole thing. And obviously, we've all traveled these roads. We all have. I have gone through all of these roads as I've been listening to and trying to hear and understand his voice. And the pattern of his voice is right up there in purple. That's the voice. If you love him, keep his commandments. Period. That's it. Not to gain eternal life, but to live now. To live here. To have an abundant life now. A fulfilled life now. So what happens if we do these things and we have a fulfilled life now? Then we will not fall prey to the nations on the outside of us who are telling us all sorts of other things are morally correct, morally good. This is acceptable. Well, we've got 5 of the commandments, but not all of them, and 10 of the commandments, but we won't fall prey to that. But instead, we will follow the shepherd to wherever he leads. That's the story, at least from John chapter 10. Now, I hope all of that will make these verses make more sense. I know we went over these last week, but they're appropriate for today as well. 1 John chapter 2 and verse 33. And by this we know that we know him, if we guard his commandments. So how do you know that you know the master? If you guard his commandments. How do you guard his commandments? By hearing his voice. Whether it's me speaking them, or you speaking them, or you reading them, or turning somebody on TV, and they're telling them, and all of a sudden they start to say stuff that's not his words, not his voice, what does that then make them? A stranger. Remember back in school, stranger danger? I don't know if they do that anymore. Remember that, stranger danger? Right? You see a stranger? Which is kind of weird because, lots of people are strangers, all sorts of people in trouble, but stranger danger. Spiritually speaking, stranger danger. The one who says, I know him, out of all of these. The one who says, I know him, and does not guard his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whoever guards his word, truly the love of Elohim has been perfected in him. By this we know that we are in him. Beloved, listen to this. Beloved, I write no fresh, meaning new. I write no new commandment to you. There are no new commandments, but an old commandment, which you have had from the beginning. From what beginning? From the mountain. When the voice spoke, and the mountain shook, and the thunders thundered, and the shofar blasts, and the smoke, and the fire. That beginning. The same commandments. So what is new? The only thing that's new is that the shepherd came to show us how to live the commandments, how to love one another. That's the only thing that's new, but that's not actually new. It was always there. We just had shepherds who did nothing but scatter us. And so he said he would come and shepherd himself. So are there new commandments? No, just the old ones. What there is new is a heart. There's a new heart towards the commandments. There's a new understanding of the commandments. There's an eyes open to the commandments. There's ears open to the commandments. There's a heart that's willing to the commandments. But there are no new commandments. So if someone tells us that there are new commandments, there are new feast days, there are new holidays, there are new days of worship, is that the voice of the master? No. It is the voice of a stranger. And we are to flee it. Get away from it. Beloved, I write no fresh commandment to you, but an old commandment which you have had from the beginning. The old commandment is the word which you heard from the beginning. John's not talking about some new commandments that the master preached. He's talking about what happened from Mount Sinai. 1 John chapter 5 and verse 22. By this we know that we love the children of Elohim, when we love Elohim and guard his commandments, which is exactly what Messiah said. For this is the love of Elohim, that we guard his commandments, and his commandments are not heavy or burdensome. So if someone tells you that following the commandments is a burden, that the law is a burden to us, is that the voice of the master? Or is that the voice of a stranger? It's the voice of a stranger. His commandments are not burdensome. The religion of Judaism is, but not the words of Yah. Here's the master, chapter 11 and verse 28. Come to me, all who labor and are burdened. Burdened with what? I put it there in the PDP. Burdened with leaven. Burdened with the doctrine of the Pharisees and Sadducees, dependent upon 7 commandments for the Gentiles and 7 loaves left over, and everything else that comes out of that. And I shall give you rest. Take my yoke. A yoke is a Hebrew idiom for studying Torah. That's what it is. That's what it means. If you take on a yoke, you are taking on the yoke of the study of Torah. Take my yoke, my study of Torah, upon you and learn from me. For I am meek and humble in heart, and you shall find rest for your beings, your souls. For my yoke, my understanding, my telling of the Torah, my teaching of the Torah, my voice is gentle. It's not the mountain shaking, because that freaked everybody out. It's not the thunder. It's not the lightning. It's not rocks exploding. It's not all the shofars blowing. He did that, and what did the people say? Give us a human being to talk to us. We can't hear that. So what did the master do? I'm going to send you a prophet like Moses, and you'll hear him. And he'll tell you the same thing that came from this mountain, except he'll tell you in a human voice, gently, with love and compassion, so that you're not freaked out by everything. And he kept his word. But the next time we hear his voice, people are going to freak out. There's going to be a freak out. It's going to be loud. It's going to be thunderous. The time for humble and gentle is now. For my yoke is gentle, and my burden, the carrying of the Torah, the yoke, is light. It's not burdensome. It's not heavy. Is this the master's voice? Yes. So if someone tells you it is burdensome and it is heavy, Is that the master's voice? No. No. My sheep hear my voice, and they follow me. They will not hear the voice of a stranger. They will move away from it. And I have other sheep that I must also bring, and make the two of them from outside of the Sea of Galilee all the way up to the Decapolis, and make them one sheepfold, one people, grafted in together, one house of Israel, feeding off of the 5 loaves for the 2 fish, with 12 baskets left over, enough for the whole house of Israel to eat until he comes. That is Abba's word for you for this morning. Well, I hope that makes sense to everybody. I know it's a little bit different way of looking at the whole sheep and voice and goats and all the rest of that. And we didn't even get into the dividing of the goats and the sheep. That's all still part of it. That's all part of the same analogy. We just don't have time to get into it today. How many ways have we looked at Torah so far? 6, 7, 8? It doesn't change. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. There is one set of commandments, one set of instructions, just a new heart to do them. That's the difference. A new covenant, a new marriage covenant, a new betrothal, not the old betrothal, a new betrothal, where we are given the spirit of truth. What is truth? The commandments are truth. His word is truth. So what is the spirit of truth? The spirit of the Torah. The Torah is spiritual, and we can know it and understand it and live it even in our day-to-day via his spirit. That's the gift to the bride. That was not given formally to the bride, but is given to us now. Beloved, this is a much, much different story than we were told. But if you're within the sound of my voice and you're hearing these words and this is making sense to you at home here, it's because you're hearing his voice. And granted, there are people in every one of these groups, that are sensitive to his voice. And if they are, sooner or later they're going to figure out which ones are not his voice. And they will leave that. And they will seek a place where they do hear his voice. So if anyone comes up to you and says, Pastor Dave said, can I have hands to do and feet to walk and a heart to obey? You know what you're going to tell them? Nah, that's not PD. That's not PD. You know what I want you to have? A heart that's willing to obey, eyes that are willing to see, and ears that are willing to hear. You hear that from somebody, then you know I said that. Know his voice. Abba, we love you. We thank you for your goodness, for your mercy, for your word, and for the voice of your word, your Son. We thank you, Father, that you have given us your spirit to understand, to internalize, to apply. Father, we want to love you with all of our heart, our soul, our mind, and our strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. Father, teach us that it is more important to do that than to even keep feast days. Because if we keep feast days and even Sabbaths, but we do not love you and we do not love our neighbor, then we fool ourselves. Father, help us to walk in your truth as Messiah walked in your truth. We, of course, ask this under his name and in his authority. In the name of Yah's salvation, we say amen and amen. Guys, thank you so much for hanging out with us this morning. I hope that you enjoyed that message. Check it out again. Download the notes. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you haven't done so already. Join us on Monday morning for our morning manna. In the meantime, have an awesome rest of the Shabbat. Good night, everybody. Shabbat shalom. Yeah, you can give a hand clap to Yah.